Hello, family, and welcome to the Invisible Body. Today is Good Friday, which to me has always seemed a little bit of a misnomer because it doesn't seem like it was a particularly good day for anybody who was in there. But it is a day we remember and we celebrate the work of what Jesus has done, the culmination of his life, and the sacrifice that he made. So today I'm going to look at the crucifixion of Jesus. And then tomorrow I'm going to look at the silence, the day where there was nothing and people kind of gave up hope. And then on Resurrection Sunday, I will be doing a sermon about the resurrection, funnily enough. So without much further ado, I'm going to read Luke chapter 22 and 23. It's quite a hefty passage. I'm going to read all of it because this is a major part of our faith, if not the major part of our faith. And I think it's extremely important for us to look at it in full. I'm not going to delve into everything that we could talk about in the passage because there is so much we could take away from it. Instead, I am going to be looking at a particular thing that has really struck me this year and really stayed with me. And then we will have a discussion about it. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen with you and you will be able to read along with me. So Luke chapter 22. Now the feast of unleavened bread drew near, which is called the Passover, and the chief priests and the scribes were seeking how to put him to death, for they feared the people. Then Satan entered into Judas called Iscariot, who was of the number of the 12. He went away and conferred with the chief priests and officers how he might betray him to them. And they were glad and agreed to give him money. So he consented and sought an opportunity to betray him to them in the absence of crowd. Then came the day of unleavened bread, on which the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed. So Jesus sent John and Peter, saying, Go and prepare the Passover for us, that we may eat it. They said to him, Where will you have us prepare it? He said to them, Behold, when you have entered the city, a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him into the house that he enters, and tell the master of the house, The teacher says to you, Where is the guest room, that I may eat the Passover with my disciples? And he will show you a large upper room furnished. Prepare it there. And they went and found it just as he had told them, and they prepared the Passover. And when the hour came, he reclined at table, and the apostles with him. And he said to them, I have earnestly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. For I tell you, I will not eat it until it is fulfilled in the kingdom of God. And he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he said, Take this, and divide it among yourselves. For I tell you that from now on I will not drink of the fruit of the vine until the kingdom of God comes. And he took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to them, saying, This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. And likewise the cup after they had eaten, saying, This cup that is poured out for you is the new covenant in my blood. But behold, the hand of him who betrays me is with me on the table. For the Son of Man goes as it has been determined, but woe to that man by whom he is betrayed. And they began to question one another, which of them it could be who was going to do this. A dispute also arose among them, as to which of them it was regarded as the greatest. And he said to him, The kings of the Gentiles exercise lordship over them, and those in authority over them are called benefactors, but not so with you. Rather, let the greatest among you become as the youngest, and the leader as the one who serves. For who is the greater? One who reclines at table or one who serves? Is it not the one who reclines at table? But I am among you as one who serves. You are those who have stayed with me in my trials, and I assign to you, as my Father assigned to me, a kingdom, that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom and sit on thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Simon, Simon, behold, Satan demanded to have you that he may sift you like wheat, but I have prayed for you that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned again, strengthen your brothers. Peter said to him, Lord, I am ready to go with you to both prison and death. Jesus said, I tell you, Peter, the rooster will not crow this day until you deny me 3 times that you know me. And he said to them, When I sent you out with no money bag or knapsack or sandals, did you lack anything? They said, Nothing. He said to them, "But now let the one who has a money bag take it, and likewise a knapsack, and let the one who has no sword sell his cloak and buy one. For I tell you that this scripture must be fulfilled in me." And he was numbered with the transgressors. "For what is written about me has its fulfillment." And they said, "Look, Lord, here are two swords." And he said to them, "It is enough." And he came out and went, as was his custom, to the Mount of Olives, and the disciples followed him. And when he came to the place, he said to them, "Pray that you may not enter into temptation." And we withdrew from them about a stone throw and knelt down and prayed, saying, "Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done." And there appeared to him an angel from heaven, strengthening him. And being in agony, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling to the ground. And when he rose from prayer, he came to the disciples and found them sleeping for sorrow. And he said to them, "Why are you sleeping? Rise and pray that you may not enter into temptation." While he was still speaking, there came a crowd, and the man called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He drew near to Jesus to kiss him, but Jesus said to him, "Judas, would you betray the Son of Man with a kiss?" And when those who were around him saw what would follow, they said, "Lord, shall we strike out with the sword?" And one of them struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his right ear. But Jesus said, "No more of this." And he touched his ear and healed him. Then Jesus said to the chief priests and the officers of the temple and elders who had come out against him, "Have you come out as against a robber with swords and clubs? When I was with you day after day in the temple, you did not lay hands on me. But this is your hour and the power of darkness." Then they seized him and led him away, bringing him into the high priest's house, and Peter was following at a distance. And when they had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter sat down among them. Then a servant girl, seeing him as he sat in the light and looking closely at him, said, "This man was also with him." But he denied it, saying, "Woman, I do not know him." And a little later, someone else saw him and said, "You are also one of them." But Peter said, "Man, I am not." And after an interval of about an hour, still another insisted, saying, "Certainly this man also was with him, for he too was a Galilean." But Peter said, "Man, I do not know what you are talking about." And immediately, while he was still speaking, the rooster crowed. And the Lord turned and looked at Peter, and Peter remembered the saying of the Lord, how he had said to him, "Before the rooster crows today, you will deny me 3 times." And he went out and wept bitterly. Now the men who were holding Jesus in custody were mocking him as they beat him. They also blindfolded him and kept asking him, "Prophesy, who is it that struck you?" And they said many other things against him, blaspheming him. When day came, the assembly of the elders of the people gathered together, both chief priests and scribes, and they led him away to their council and said, "If you are the Christ, tell us." But he said to them, "If I tell you, you will not believe. And if I ask you, you will not answer. But from now on, the Son of Man shall be seated at the right hand of the power of God." So they all said, "Are you the Son of God then?" And he said to them, "You say that I am." Then they said, "What further testimony do we need? We have heard it ourselves from his own lips." Luke 23. Then the whole company of them arose and brought him before Pilate. And they began to accuse him, saying, "We found this man misleading our nation and forbidding us to give tribute to Caesar, and saying that he himself is Christ, a king." And Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And he answered him, "You have said so." Then Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowds, "I find no guilt in this man." But they were urgent, saying, "He stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea, from Galilee even to this place." When Pilate heard this, he asked whether the man was a Galilean. And when he learnt that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him over to Herod, who was himself in Jerusalem at that time. When Herod saw Jesus, he was very glad, for he had long desired to see him, because he had heard about him, and he was hoping to see some sign done by him. So he questioned him at some length, but he made no answer. The chief priests and the scribes stood by, vehemently accusing him, and Herod with his soldiers treated him with contempt and mocked him. Then, arraying him in splendid clothing, he sent him back to Pilate. And Herod and Pilate became friends with each other that very day, for before this they had been at enmity with each other. Then Pilate called together the chief priests and the rulers of the people and said to them, "You brought me this man as one who is misleading the people. And after examining him before you, behold, I do not find this man guilty of any of the charges against him. Neither did Herod, for he sent him back to us. Look, nothing deserving death has been done by him. I will therefore punish him and release him. But they all cried out together, Away with this man, and release to us Barabbas, a man who had been thrown into prison for an insurrection started in the city and for murder. Pilate addressed them once more, desiring to release Jesus, but they kept shouting, Crucify, crucify him. A third time he said to them, Why? What evil has he done? I have found in him no guilt deserving death. I will therefore punish and release him. But they were urgent, demanding with loud cries that he should be crucified, and their voices prevailed. So Pilate decided that their demands should be granted. He released the man who had been thrown into prison for insurrection and murder, for whom they asked, but he delivered Jesus over to their will. And as they led him away, they seized one Simon of Cyrene, who was coming out of the country, and laid him on the cross to carry it behind Jesus. And there followed him a great multitude of the people and women who were mourning and lamenting for him. But turning to them, Jesus said, Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For behold, the days are coming where they will say, Blessed are the barren and the wombs that never bore and the breasts that never nursed. Then they will begin to say to the mountains, Fall on us, and the hills, cover us. For if they do these things when the wood is green, what will happen when it is dry? 2 others who were criminals were led away to be put to death with him. And when they came to the place that is called the Skull, there they crucified him and the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. And Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. They cast lots to divide his garments, and the people stood by watching. But the rulers scoffed at him, saying, He saved others, let him save himself, if he is the Christ of God, his chosen one. The soldiers were also mocking him, coming up and offering him sour wine and saying, If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself. There was also an inscription over him, This is the king of the Jews. One of the criminals who were hanged railed at him, saying, Are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us. But the other rebuked him, saying, Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we are receiving the due reward for our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong. And he said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And he said, Truly, I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise. It was now about the 6th hour, and there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour, while the sun's light failed, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Then Jesus, calling out with a loud voice, said, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And having said this, he breathed his last. Now when the centurion saw what had taken place, he praised God, saying, Certainly this man was innocent. And all the crowds that had assembled for this spectacle, when they saw what had taken place, returned home beating their breasts. And all his acquaintances and the woman who had followed him from Galilee stood at a distance watching these things. Now there was a man named Joseph from the Jewish town of Arimathea. He was a member of the council, a good and righteous man who had not consented to their decision and action, and he was looking for the kingdom of God. This man went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then he took it down and wrapped it in a linen shroud and laid him in a tomb cut in stone where no one had ever yet been laid. It was the day of preparation, and the Sabbath was beginning. The woman who had come from him from Galilee followed and saw the tomb and how his body was laid. Then they returned and prepared spices and ointments. On the Sabbath day they rested, according to the commandment. Now there is a lot to unpack in these 2 chapters. There are a lot of theological themes. There are a lot of things that Jesus says. There are a lot of things that the disciples say. There are a lot of things that Pilate and Herod. And there are just so many players in this scene that it's kind of, well, I mean, it's food for sermons for years for Easter, which is really handy if you're a pastor and needing to write sermons. This year, however, when I was reflecting on the journey of Jesus through his crucifixion, something really stood out to me that hasn't stood out to me before, and maybe it's stood out to you before, but for me it was a bit of a new thing, so I thought I would delve into it a little bit. What occurred to me was we have this kind of contrast between two men who knew Jesus and deny him, and two men who didn't know Jesus and would have been seen as enemies of Jesus, who recognize him in his death. So the first two men are Peter and Judas. So we have the scene at the beginning, they're all together, they're all celebrating Passover, but Judas is already planning to betray Jesus for money. Now, we give Judas a really hard time, kind of justified, but I kind of have been wondering, do you think he knew the extent to which they would go? In other gospel stories, when Judas finds out that they are going to crucify Jesus, he takes the money back to the Pharisees and says, I want no part of this. And so they say, well, too bad, too late. And he then takes that money and goes and kills himself out of remorse. So I don't think he had any idea. I think Jesus was not living up to his vision of what a Messiah was. Jesus was not coming and throwing the Romans out of Israel. He wasn't being a king. He wasn't, Judas wasn't a mighty leader with lots of wealth and everything that he probably thought he would get by following the Messiah of Israel. And so he saw an opportunity to kind of take some money, and maybe he thought Jesus would just get flogged or would get thrown out of the temple or something that he would get punished. But did he think it would end in Jesus' death? I don't think he did. I don't think he really thought that far ahead. It says in Luke that Satan came into his heart. What does that mean? Was he demonically possessed or was he tempted? I'm not sure. I'd have to delve into that differently, but what we do know is that he betrays Jesus for greed. That is the big thing. It's for greed. He wants money. He wants to be rich, and he's not getting that following Jesus, and so he gets it by betraying Jesus. And then we have Peter, who says, within one night, I will die for you, and then denies Jesus 3 times. I think of the people that I love the most, that I'm closest to, because Peter and Jesus were really close. They were really good friends. More than friends. There was a mentor relationship there. There was so much that was going on. Peter had walked on the water with Jesus. He had recognized Jesus as the Christ. He had been through so much with Jesus. He's a hard-headed man, and it took some repeating on Jesus' part to get some things through to Peter. But Peter had been faithful for 3 years, and then he's told by Jesus that he's going to betray him. He's going to reject him. He's going to deny him 3 times. I think if somebody said that to me when I had no idea what was coming, like Peter had no idea what was coming in the next day. All Jesus talk about the broken body and the blood poured out, and all of that must have been a little bit mystifying. It must have been like, oh, here goes Jesus again talking about stuff we don't really understand. And I think, if somebody said to me, oh, you're going to deny your husband 3 times instead of going to prison or dying with him or whatever, I'd be like, no. Or, you're going to deny your best friend, that you knew your best friend 3 times before tonight is finished. I would totally not accept that. I would be like, no, not at all. And I can understand that Peter probably felt quite a bit affronted and a bit offended that Jesus would even suggest this thing. And yet he does. He does. Where Judas betrays out of greed, Peter denies out of fear. He denies Jesus because he's afraid of what Jesus is going through, what Jesus is facing, and he doesn't want to be a part of that. He doesn't know what's going to happen. He's at a loss. He's like, what is happening? My whole world is imploding. I was following this man who is the Messiah, and now he's been arrested and is being flogged and is being mocked, and I'm afraid. I'm scared. I don't want to be seen as following him, because if I'm seen as following him, then maybe I'll be going through it rather than just being able to observe it. I think that is a completely understandable reaction. And I think, honestly, I would probably do the same thing. Um, it would be terrifying. It would be terrifying to see all this go down in the middle of the night and have no idea what was happening. Um, so Judas betrays with greed. Peter betrays out of fear. And then on the flip side, when Jesus is on the cross, there is a man next to him on the cross who looks over at Jesus and accepts his own guilt and accepts that he deserves to be on the cross, but that Jesus doesn't. He looks at Jesus and recognizes him for who he is and says, "Show me mercy, even in this place. Show me mercy, even though I deserve what I'm getting. Remember me." And then we have the centurion, Roman centurion, total enemy of the Israelite people, who looks at Jesus and recognizes who he is. And in some gospels, it says, he says, "Surely this is the Son of God." And this one, it says, this man was innocent. And he praises God. He sees Jesus in that moment and knows who he is and speaks it out loud. It says, "I see him. I recognize him. I know who he is." And so you have, on the one hand, these two men that knew Jesus so well, who abandoned him, betrayed out of greed and out of fear. And then on the other side, we have those who, like the man on the cross, who are in the midst of taking part in sin or are being punished for that sin justly, who see Jesus and say, "Even though I deserve everything I'm getting, I see you. I know who you are. I know you can show me mercy. Please show me mercy." And they call out in the midst of all of it for salvation. And then you have those who see the truth and recognize it immediately and embrace it. And that is such a contrast, because the two people who see the truth and who embrace it, even in the midst of pain and suffering, or even as the person who is putting Jesus to death, they see the truth and they embrace it in that moment. They are people who would have been seen as well outside of the group of disciples, an enemy of the Israelite people, and yet the people who betrayed Jesus are the ones who are his closest friends, who would have been seen as tight group, his religious fanatics, in some cases, the people who followed him around for 3 years. Like, that's quite a contrast, that even in his death, Jesus is turning things upside down and saying, "It's not who you think is going to be the people who recognize me and call out for salvation in this moment. It's not the people that you think." Just as all through his teachings and everything, he has always been saying, it is not the religious people that you think that are close to salvation. It is the people on the outskirts that are close to salvation. And again, he does it again, but this time with his very disciples. He says, "It is not the people that you think that will recognize me and what I'm going through. It is the people who you would reject and say are not even part of this story that are the ones that will see the truth." So for me, and I would like for you, this Good Friday, I would like us to reflect on, where do we stand in this story? Who do we identify with? Not putting ourselves in the story, because we weren't there, but we can look at the story and go, well, who do I identify with? Am I coming to church because I've always come to church? Because church gives me accolades, because church is a place where I have a job, or where people know me. I'm getting a lot out of it for myself. I feel good about myself. I feel like a good Christian. Are we going for greed? Are we going because it actually makes us feel pretty good? Are we coming to Jesus because we're like, yeah, we're pretty good. Like, I get a lot out of this for me. Are we going out of fear? Are we coming to Jesus out of fear and going, well, I don't want to go to hell, or I don't want to reject the teachings my parents I grew up in, or I don't want the people at the church to think that I'm a terrible person, so I'm going to keep going. Um, and if that is our heart towards that, what does it actually say about our relationship with Jesus? Are we accepting him and accepting him in our lives as a transformative salvific work? Or are we simply putting on the facade of being a good Christian for our own benefit out of greed and fear? Or are we coming to Jesus recognizing that we deserve all the stuff that we get, all the punishment, we deserve it. And yet, despite the fact that we are in sin, despite the fact that we deserve to be out upon that cross, we recognize him. We recognize him and we know that he will show us mercy, that even in the moment of our death, that he will be there. Or are we standing on the ground going, I put him to death, and now I see the truth? I think we can be a combination of all of those things. I don't think we have to be one person in the story, but I think there is a definite place for us to sit and reflect on how we are coming to Christ, how we are bringing ourselves to Christ, how we are allowing others to come to Christ as well. How are we accepting people who may not look like they belong in our church, the Roman centurion or the guy on the cross, like people who, might not fit in our cultural understandings of Christianity. Are we allowing them to come to Christ openly because they see the truth? Are we hearing in them truth that maybe that we've kind of forgotten and lost a little bit in our own cultural understanding of faith? Are we, holding ourselves accountable for our own greed and our own fear, and holding each other accountable for our own greed and our own fear? And how does this all change the way that we approach what Jesus has done and what he continues to do? Because Jesus died on that cross for us, for every single one of us. And we can either reject that or we can embrace it and say, my sin held you there. Have mercy on me. So today, as we reflect on what God has done through Jesus' death, on what he went through, let us really search our own hearts as to how are we approaching that salvific work? How are we approaching Jesus on the cross? How are we turning our hearts to a place of accepting his mercy, even in the midst of our sin? Go well, reflect well. We'll touch base again tomorrow.